more people might have joined us. So, hello everyone, and I'm Nat of Pearl, and it's a pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. Today's session is Leading with Compassion, and on behalf of the People team and our guest expert, Dr. Dan Martin, we welcome you to our Agony Expert Series.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, lovely to have you here, Dan. So in our Agony Expert session today, we're going to explore the area of compassionate leadership, which Dan is an expert on. For those of you who have joined us for the first time, let's just give you a little bit of a background of the series. So the idea of the Agony Expert originated from the concept of the agony aunt, when we still used to read magazines from cover to cover, and that would be this person with whom speakers could ask advice from. And she, it was usually a lady, would have lots of worldly advice and gospel advice. Well, today you call her YouTube or Google, I guess, but there's really just too much information. So we thought it would be fun to use the Agony Expert concept as we curate a list of timely topics from 17 experts across 8 categories to provide you access to expert insights all throughout the month of August. So today's session is on Leading with Compassion, and we have Dr. Dan Martin, CEO and President of Brightsity, a professional training and coaching and tech firm. He will speak about leading with compassion and delve into the concepts about how we can develop compassion and self-compassion. Also explore how leaders can offer psychological well-being and strengthen organizational culture, as well as develop leadership positively so that leaders use their power in a positive manner, and more. So a little bit of background on People. So what we do as an organization is that we're a consulting firm that started in 2004, and we sold ourselves and relaunched again last year with a consulting model that's geared towards the future of work. Our team serves both our clients and our network of over 1,200 experts. And our experts are consultants, business leaders, thought leaders, researchers, and tech partners. Together, we deliver consulting work, speaking engagements, lunch and learns, training, coaching, instructional design, organizational and people diagnostics. Our experts deliver work across 6 broad domains: people, digital innovation, business sustainability, change management, and design. So check out our website at www.people.com to find out more. In terms of a quick run through of the agenda, we'll have Dan speak and address the group and speak about all the wonderful things around compassionate leadership. And then we'd like to open the floor out to everyone to ask some questions. And we will go on for about 55 minutes or so. So to the top of the hour, we will end at 2:30. Okay, so do remember to post your questions. And without further ado, I do hand over the floor now to Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Awesome, Natasha. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Pearl, for putting all this awesomeness together and the awesomeness of those many experts that you're able to pull together to do some amazing things. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can start this little slide deck, if that's okay with you guys. And here we go. There we are. Oops, I should have been back. All right. So here's some really interesting things. I did not know very much about compassion just about 4 years ago. I shouldn't say 4 years ago. I should say probably about 10 or 11 years ago. I was doing some work on large-scale mentoring platforms for the university system that I work for, the California State University. It's the largest public university system in the United States. And I realized that, there was a lot that could be done with these platforms. So at some point in around 2013, some of my work got the attention of my dear friends over at Stanford. And the people who wanted me to work with them were actually from a place called the Center for Compassion, Altruism Research and Education. And I had never heard of any organization that studied this kind of work or this kind of material. And by training, I'm a social and industrial organizational psychologist, so I have a tendency to look for data supporting any concept, no matter what that is. So the interesting thing about the data around compassion is that it's exceptionally strong, and it's something that's missing from a lot of people's lives. We'll talk about why that is, try to model that. So I have a bunch of different hats. You'll hear from all of them today. I know you're going to say I talk too fast, but I always like to remind people they're listening too slow. I'm teasing, that's a joke. We just need to get a little bit more coffee in us as we go. So let's go ahead and get started. So we know there's so many positive physical, psychological, and social benefits of compassion and self-compassion, but it's something that we rarely discuss. It's something that we do not really bring to work with us. We perceive work as being oftentimes dog eat dog, kind of who can make it to the top the fastest, and who cares if you're hurting people to get that way. We don't talk about this in our classrooms. We don't talk about this really tangibly, even in our hospitals, which is horribly ironic, right? Here are these organizations that are dedicated to compassionately taking care of people, when in fact, it's just another workplace, and the doctors and the nurses suffer from compassion fatigue, just like the rest of us do. So I want to start exploring what this concept of compassion is. So let's talk about the core fundamentals of what compassion actually is. So oftentimes you'll hear compassion being associated with something called mindfulness. Mindfulness is your awareness of your environment. It's your awareness of how you are engaged in your environment. It's also awareness of what's happening inside of you. So the first component of compassion really is just being aware of suffering, whether that's your own suffering or somebody else's suffering. The second component is really that empathic kind of response that you have to the person's pain, or even giving yourself a break and saying, wow, I'm really hurting. I need to take a step back. This is really a critical part, because oftentimes people don't make the distinction between empathy and compassion. Compassion is empathy with action, and I'll get to that in a second. But if we were all much more empathic people, we'd actually be incredibly depressed, because without doing anything about the suffering that we see around us, we would just be wallowing in sorrow. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be empathic, my friends. I'm just saying there's this third important component. Some definitions have a fourth component. I'll talk about that in a second. But really, the core component that I appreciate about compassion is it's acting wisely to address the suffering. And I insert that wisely component there because we all have friends, we all have parents, we all have people that care about us. And when they take care of us or they try to address our suffering, they're doing it in a way that suits them or the way that they believe we want to be treated, when in fact, that may not be appropriate for us, right? So we have to consider it in the sense that, like, for example, I used to teach clinical psychology students cross-cultural psychology. And my students and the populations they were going to work with were very different. And my students' desire to help was actually hurting people coming from different cultural backgrounds. So it's really critical to understand that it's this awareness, it's the empathy, and then finally taking action to address the suffering. So let's take it a little bit deeper, specifically into the workplace. Just think for a second about your favorite managers over the course of your career. Think about the leaders that touched you, that made a difference. Think about maybe university professors or the teachers who touched you, when you were going through school. There's a core component that people miss oftentimes in these kinds of positions. And what it is people's capacity to emotionally connect with another human being. Compassion fundamentally does that. So we'll dive into that for a little bit. So what do we know about leadership? We know a lot about leadership, as a matter of fact. And the interesting thing is that we find that there's different leadership styles, there's different approaches, one fundamental kind of say base of our understanding of good leadership is that we find transformational leadership to be associated with the development of other employees, other leaders, and it's related to a huge array of positive organizational outcomes as well. So that could be motivation, job satisfaction, organizational commitment, creativity, safety, performance, well-being, et cetera, et cetera. It really does go on. I encourage you to take a look at scientific literature because it's really quite rich, and it really is indicative of the fact that we can take steps to not only become a transformational leader, but to embrace the compassionate components within it. So when we think about leaders, I often get these questions like, can a leader be too, compassionate? And later on, we'll talk about 3 different directions of compassion. The first direction is being compassionate to others. And can you be too compassionate to others? Well, if you are unbalanced because you're not taking care of yourself, then it's feasible. But the second component direction is receiving compassion from oneself. If that makes sense. So it's you saying to yourself, hey, I have limited resources. I can take care of myself, I can take care of others, but I also need to take care of myself as well. The third component is a component that's really hard, especially for men or male leaders. It is being willing to receive compassion from others. And this is really critical because what do we know about men everywhere in the world? They're taught that it's weak to accept help from anybody, and accordingly, they oftentimes don't when it's something that they actually desperately need. Okay, so what do we know about compassionate leadership? We know that people who work for compassionate leaders like their bosses, they like their leaders. They go to take extra steps to make sure that things are done by virtue of that compassionate leader. They know that this is something that is related to engagement as well as retention, and they also know that, hey, this is something that's going to lend itself to organizational commitment. The interesting thing about this is compassion actually has a number of ripple effects, something that you see actually moving through a chain of employees, maybe from the leader to the manager to the employees, and it kind of keeps on going. So we really find that this is manifest in just about every industry where we've studied it. These are tough times, folks. I don't need to tell you. We're all in Delta world these days. It's kind of a unique circumstance, and it's unclear as to what's going to be going on. But employees are suffering right now. They're suffering by virtue of having their office in their kitchen. They're suffering by virtue of not being able to connect with their colleagues. They're suffering by virtue of not being able to interact with their clients. So we need to think of our role as a compassionate leader as somebody who actually addresses collective trauma and helps people move through this process of recognizing something actually happened. This was a hurtful thing. This is a painful thing for a lot of people. So you do want to give that some consideration as you're working with your employees, because you want to really make sure that it's okay to be human at work. Does that mean not being professional? Absolutely not. Does that mean that you have to take every request? Absolutely not. I mean, the most important thing is to see compassion as a behavior that's manifest based on those 3 elements that we were talking about. So it could show up in a lot of different ways. It could show up by virtue of the leader mentoring someone. It could show up by virtue of the leader potentially adding resources to somebody's busy plate or something of this sort. So we really want to make sure that you do pay attention to the kinds of things that are going to facilitate resilience in your employees. So I'm not going to go through these things and read them to you, but the long and short is that ripple effect that we were describing earlier actually does kind of move through organizations, and it's fun. It's interesting to watch. It's more interesting to do research on this stuff because it really does happen, and it's kind of amazing because the ripple effects lead to happier family lives as well, which is kind of nice to say the least. So how can we actually manifest this? We know that lots of organizations say they're compassionate organizations, but what is their commitment and what does it look like behaviorally? And is it being measured? I think these are really critical questions to ask yourself, because oftentimes I'll talk to a leader and the leader will say to me, yeah, I'm a very compassionate person. I, I want to make sure that my employees don't stay at work too long, but instead his he's grinding his employees down in essence by making sure that they get out on time. So there's a host of different things that we need to think of when it comes to measurement and how these things manifest itself. But this could just be setting up some sort of token program where people can actually provide each other with compliments for work that they've done, and then they earn tokens to give to other folks. It's pretty simple stuff. So when we think about collaborative organizations, we think about good organizations, we think about creative organizations. How many of you have tried to be creative while you're incredibly stressed out? It's not a very effective way to be creative, is it? You probably get your best ideas when you're totally chill, relaxed, you're not worried about anything besides, maybe what you're having for dinner or something of this sort. So the thing is when we think about compassion, we want to put it in context. So I'll give you some context really quickly. You are all wonderful people, all exceptionally intelligent, all exceptionally brilliant, all exceptionally ambitious. So you have a strong drive system, meaning you want to accomplish things. You want to get that promotion. You want to get that raise. You want to create the best organization in the world. You want to have the most competitive organization out there. So the drive system is really important in the sense that it's what keeps us motivated. Another fundamental emotional structure that we have is fear. So what happens if I don't get that promotion? What happens if the organization fails? What happens if I don't get that raise? So these two systems, generally speaking, are working very closely together, right? So you want to achieve something, but you're sometimes scared it's not going to work, or there might be threats in your environment from competition, things of this sort. The last emotional system that we really rarely talk about is the soothing system. And the soothing system is fundamental to all of us mammals. We feel good when people take care of us. We feel supported when we're seen, when we're heard. We feel like we're part of something larger, and it can kind of take us away from the ambitious drive system and the scary threat system or fear system, and just put us in a little bit more equilibrium. So it's not that we're going to ever take away the drive system. It's not that we're ever going to take away the fear system. We evolved to avoid threats, right? But what we do need to acknowledge is the fact that we do have this mammalian capacity to actually be very good to each other. And no great civilization would have ever been built without people's capacity to actually collaborate and to care for each other. It's quite simple. So you see those things manifest kind of in this slide. So it's really interesting. I live in the United States. Please come and visit me just as soon as this pandemic is over. I'd be happy to host you guys. My country is hyper individualistic and hyper capitalist, which makes for a lot of. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody asking a question?
Hello. Do you have a question for Dan, or maybe your mic is not muted?
So it's really no surprise that people lack compassion and empathy at work. Why? Because they might be perceived as being weak. As a matter of fact, I just had a wonderful conversation with a young man. His name is Justin Zhu. He is the CEO of a company that was valued at $2 billion. And right when they got their valuation, he was fired. And the reason he claims he was fired is because he was using a very compassionate leadership model. And his investors, or the investors in the board, was suggesting that, we don't need a weak person to lead the company anymore. We need a strong person to lead the company now. And he is arguing that that's actually the case. So this is normal. I mean, folks, I'm a business professor. That's what I do for my day-to-day. Students of business are different than other students. I do a lot of work on things like hierarchy, maintenance, and society. That's just another way of saying ugly things in the human condition, like racism or prejudice or sexism. And the interesting thing is when you measure this from a variety of different approaches, you find that business students really do like hierarchy, and they're ambitious, and they do want to succeed, and they do want to make it to the top. And the role models that they're given, generally speaking, are very ruthless, if that makes sense. So we're used to seeing that in our financial organizations. We're used to seeing that in management circles. And we really want to make sure that that's not the case. And I'm going to show you why based on some research that I did a couple of years ago. So really quickly, here I was using a great scale by a guy by the name of Paul Gilbert. And Paul put out a great psychometric tool. Psychometric tool is a tool that measures psychological properties and is able to predict behavior. So in this circumstance, we were using a fears of compassion scale. So remember, it's not enough just to say, hey, be good to people or be compassionate with yourself. It's important to say, well, what are the barriers that might be there, that might exist for people being compassionate with themselves or with others? So what I did, this is part of a broader study, is I collected data on people's fears of compassion, as well as stress, anxiety, and depression. Stress, anxiety, and depression are associated with low levels of managerial and leadership performance. Depressed, stressed, and anxious people don't perform well in anything. It doesn't matter if they're students, it doesn't matter if they're leaders. So what we found in this circumstance is that people's fears of compassion really related quite significantly to things like anxiety and depression. When you look at the level of depression and you go over here to this quadrant and you say, wow, so people's fear of receiving compassion from others is correlated at 0.7. This is really terrifying because this is the exact thing they need to deal with depression. They need human connection. They need compassion from others. Same thing with compassion for self. What you're seeing here quantitatively is a leader that is beating themselves up. They're saying to themselves, I'm terrible. I suck. I shouldn't be doing this. When in fact, they need to be giving themselves permission to keep striving, to keep moving ahead. So when you think of this, think about what might be a barrier for you to give compassion to others. Will they take advantage of you? Are you perceiving them as they might take advantage of you? If you receive it from others, are you worried that you're going to be manipulated because somebody was generous with you or addressed your suffering? And also, how frequently do all of us do our best at work on a daily basis, and then at night beat ourselves up because we think we're terrible, and we say things about ourselves that we'd never even say to our worst enemy. So be cautious about that and be aware that there are potential barriers to receiving compassion, to giving compassion, taking it from others as well. So here's the part where research is just dumb. Why do I say research is dumb? Because you can do research on something and never know anything about it, nor never change anybody's life by virtue of that research. And having been in the teaching field for a long time, I've always recognized that the best way to help people understand a concept is to give them a taste of the concept, then to let them go ahead and digest it from the lens of their own gender, their own age, their own ideology, their own culture, their own religion, whatever the case may be. And in doing so, you're giving people the opportunity to really own that knowledge and really recognize it from where they're coming from. So Brightsity came about maybe 2016 when I was doing that large scale mentoring work that I told you about before. What I did was I turned my mentoring platform on its side and created a peer-based relational learning model. This is really straightforward. It's pedagogy that's been used for a long time to instruct people. And more importantly, we're supporting it with evidence, because I do a lot of work with organizations in terms of training and development. Oftentimes, they don't really have any type of evaluation. And being a professor for, 20 years now, I can tell you that grades do not predict anything. It's a waste of time, right? It's this vague scale that measures persistence and ability to pay. So I really encourage people when they're thinking about their kids going to school, we want to think about some ways to measure what we're purporting to actually teach people, right? Um, People might think I'm smart because I have a PhD and I wear glasses, but they cannot see my competence unless I measure it, if that makes sense. So what is the process that Brightsity uses? We take cutting edge research, we condense it to the level of a 13-year-old's reading capability, not because we think people are dumb. It's just we know we're dealing with really busy professionals like doctors, like nurses, like engineers, like business owners. So we want to make sure that that's very simple and straightforward. The second thing we do is they're partnered with another participant, and they meet at their convenience, and they actually utilize clinical level interventions coming from clinical and social psychology to optimize normal people. This is not therapy, but it oftentimes feels like it for a lot of people because it's the first time somebody's had an opportunity to really dive deep into one of these core concepts. And more importantly, it's done in a non-judgmental and a non-hierarchical way. This way, people feel really comfortable and they spend a good deal of time really diving deep into this stuff. When they're finished with that, they go ahead and they reflect on the actual outcomes of the conversation. And before they start, they receive a battery of psychometric assessments. What does that mean? It means that we're measuring the actual competencies that we are going to be providing them with, that the training is going to be about, and we're also supporting their psychological well-being. So I'll show you what that looks like. In essence, it's a platform. You log on, you answer some questions, you get matched with a partner. It could be in a wide array of classes. The class that we are talking about today is actually called Leading with Compassion, and it covers 8 different sections ranging from just an introduction to the neuropsychology of emotions, all the way to mindsets, to using power compassionately, because that's a tricky topic, how to build compassionate teams, a broad array of different concepts. But they move through these modules, and the first time they get online, and they've already learned a little bit about empathic active listening, as well as motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is just a type of relational tool to make sure that these people become accountability partners. And this is really, really important. When they go in, you'll see here's the session, and there's me being ridiculous in my kitchen again. Sorry about that. But they call their partner and they just take turns asking each other questions. These questions move through a funnel. They go from the conceptual level to the behavioral level to the applied level. So we might ask somebody, hey, who's the most compassionate leader you've ever seen or heard of? And they'll probably say something like Mahatma Gandhi. And then the question would be, what did Gandhi do that was compassionate? And what discrete specific actions did Gandhi take? And then what would it be like if you applied these kinds of approaches, these actions in your life? And then finally, what are you doing this coming week? So we're always moving through a behavioral ratcheting process to ensure that people actually are gaining something from this process. So here are the different components you can see on the side. The reading material is that condensed stuff. It could be videos, it could be audio. The session is where they're talking to their partner, and there's a built-in web camera right there. And then there's outcomes, and the outcomes are really important in the sense that they make salient what people might experience. So when we talk about compassion, well, how does that manifest in my body? Does it manifest in terms of less stress, less anxiety? Does it manifest in terms of better interpersonal relationships? Does it manifest in terms of better understanding of my leadership style? We give our participants the opportunity to go ahead and click off on these things. It does great because, number one, they're able to see tangible outcomes associated with what they're doing. Also, it's great because we can give the training departments or the managers information every week and say, hey, 85% of your participants had better interpersonal relations last week. At the end of the 8-week session, that's how long this class is, there is a battery of post psychometric tests. So we can definitively say, yes, your leadership statistically significantly shifted across this cohort of people that are participating in this. So for me, over the past year, my students have been using the platform as they always are, because they're my like guinea pigs. But the funny thing about it is it works really well because not only are they gaining the kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities that we're training them in, but as importantly, we're diminishing their stress, anxiety, depression through this very difficult time of COVID-19. So the bottom line is when we're running these kinds of programs, there's no trainer. There doesn't need to be. The people already have the capacity to look inside. And with these questions, they're really able to delve quite deeply and they gain quite a bit from it. It's very pleasant. But you can see here, we've been able to statistically significantly increase leadership capacity, service orientation, compassion for self and others while addressing these difficult components. And social dominance orientation is racist and sexist proclivities. So this is all with no faculty. This is all distributed populations. This is all quite simple and straightforward. So I just want to say thank you guys so much. I think I'm on time. I think so. And I'm really excited to hear some of your questions. We are just really expanding quite a bit. We just launched in the UK. We're launching in Brazil very shortly as well. And we just launched in Canada as well. So it's been an exciting time. It's been really fun working with P-Pearl as well. So I'm just thrilled and excited that you guys sat through yet another awesomely rambling lecture. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. That was really interesting. Dan, we have some questions in the chat.
Sure.
Well, firstly, Sharon, who's been following us throughout the series. Thank you, Sharon, for your support. And she had a comment that the story you shared is so real in the corporate world where shareholders' interest takes precedence. And maybe you could comment on that and how organizations can change. And then there's another comment from Dennis who said that he was shocked at Tony Xia's death a few months ago, you know, the CEO of Zappos.
Yes, of Zappos. Yeah, of course.
And he said, do you think he lacks compassion for himself? But then he started Zappos, one of the model compassionate culture case studies. So how can we rationalize this discrepancy? Very interesting question, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. That just gave me the chills because I read a really detailed kind of investigation into his death. You know, was it suicide? Was it a mistake? And the fascinating thing about Tony C was that he was this exceptionally compassionate person to other people. As a matter of fact, after he kind of shifted gears from Zappos, he was trying to invest money into kind of revitalizing urban communities, like in a bunch of different places. And the pressure that you see in these kinds of people is that they're so used to driving that when there's no results, they start chewing themselves up from the inside out. And it led to him really abusing drugs and alcohol quite a bit. And that subsequently is why they think that possibly his death was caused. So yeah, it is chilling, and it is something that really bears a lot of consideration because we're not geared to be our own friends, and nobody trained us to give ourselves the same kind of consideration that our parents are always, hammering us about taking care of other people, right? So it's imperative that we do take a step back. You're not weak. You're not being overly indulgent. If you don't have any energy, you can't give to other people. So it's absolutely important to step back, sometimes, especially as a leader, and say, how can I be better if I took better care of myself? And maybe that means, delegating more frequently. Maybe that means not taking on as much as you might want to. I know all of us, everybody on this call is a very ambitious person. But can you bite off more than you can chew? I think, yeah, definitely. So the first question, though, I encourage you to read about this guy's case because Justin Zhu, he was describing to me that, the approach that he was taking really was manifest by his childhood in Shanghai, and how he was trained to really take care of everybody at the same time, not just about the profits. And the profits were on target and everything was fine. So the interesting, case in this circumstance in the United States is this could be, in essence, racist behavior on the part of the board itself. So what you're starting to see is a lot of movement towards compassion in boards. That sounds really hard to even imagine, but at the same time, profit can be crushed when the company's culture is diminished by an incessant need for results. So we really do need to kind of pay attention to that. I think that you'll start to see that there's a big push to help people really understand that, if you want to build something that's going to last for a long time and be productive and successful, you can't just say something like "do no evil," right? Like the famous Google kind of quote. There's a lot of problems there, and I'm not judging, but it's this chronic push. It's this chronic push that doesn't recognize that engineers are human beings, software developers are human beings. So interesting, and both great questions.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's funny you were saying compassion in boards. It's almost like an oxymoron or a juxtaposition, isn't it? And, yeah, but it's important, and I think this has a bearing on a connection with sustainability. The long-term viability of an organization, and compassion has a lot to do with it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, when I first heard the word compassion, I just kind of chuckled and thought, oh, Hello Kitty, get well card or something like this, right? I didn't even know really what it was. But, it takes a good deal of courage and strength to be able to tell an employee that's not doing well that you have to let them go, and maybe this isn't the right path for them. But in essence, you're freeing them up, to take care of what their needs actually are. And if you know any business student anywhere in the world, they've always, they've either been shoved into it by their parents and they really want to become an actor or guitarist or something like that, or they just didn't know that there was really anything else out there. And it's really important to kind of recognize that business is normal. It's awesome. It's not something to be frowned upon, and it's okay to compete, and it's okay to be assertive and to have that drive. It just, when we hit a point that it is having consequences in terms of HR outcomes, in terms of productivity, in terms of, like you're saying, the sustainability of the organization and its employees, then it is time to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, what would this look like in our organization? So what behaviors would actually be associated with compassion? How do we know that we were actually taking care of each other? Because people say, oh yeah, we're a compassionate organization. Really, yeah, what does that look like? How does that manifest?
Mhm. So if we were gonna ask for, let's say, five ways, or just a couple of ways to start practicing and building compassion at work, what would they be? Some practical tips.
Well, I mean, I think letting people know that this isn't some sort of fake topic, right? That there's actually scientific research on this, and it ranges from the neuropsychological to the social psychological side of the house. So number one, letting people know, hey, this isn't something that's not real, and it's not just the flavor of the day, right? The management topic of the day. Number two, giving people the definition that we were talking about, and then letting them communicate amongst themselves and say, hey, what would it be like? Or what are the barriers to compassion? Because it could be that there's just a workflow issue that people aren't paying close attention to, that it might just manifest immediately, right? So again, it's not just to say, oh, be nice to everybody. It's to really say, look, these are these three components. Where are we? Where are there deficits? What would the actual behaviors be if we were to manifest them? How can we see that this was actually happening? And then reward people for it, right? So, the really interesting thing is, somebody might want mentoring from a leader. but another person might think that it's overbearing behavior, right? So really understanding, taking that wisdom component that we were talking about previously and saying, what would it feel like for you? Because it could be very different for another person. And that's okay, but that's where we need to actually go with this stuff. So giving people the opportunity to be exposed to it, and then giving them an opportunity to really describe the behavior in their environment, because it's going to be different from it'll be different from HR to finance, right?
Right. Oh, Sharon made a comment as well, and she said, yeah, walk the talk and walk the talk, literally. Walk the talk and walk the walk.
Yeah.
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 And Vivian has a comment or question. She says that compassion is a soft word, and how would one make it palatable for leaders?
So that's a great question. And it's this word that has a weight to it, right? I think that people are kind of like, oh, whatever, flim flam, it's kind of ridiculous stuff. I'll just tell you how I've done it. I don't tell people I'm teaching them compassionate leadership, because a good leader is a compassionate person. They have to be. So it's an intrinsic part of the occupation or of the title itself. And if you're not, people will leave. People will reject. People will create their own business and competition, and they'll work you out, right? Because people don't want to be working for somebody who's not really who's anything but compassionate. So what I've done in many circumstances is just told people, hey, this is a leadership program that's going to give you the same skill set as like a transformational leadership program would, because it does. And then at the end of 8 weeks, people come up to me like, I didn't realize that I was a real jerk. And also, thanks for saving my marriage. And I'm all, oh, cool. Yeah, because the reality is that, these are behaviors that are applicable at work, but of course they're applicable in all of our relationships, right? Between us and our kids, between us and our families, between us and the people of our communities. So we want to give ourselves a little bit of a boost, give people the opportunity to taste this because they'll like it, but also at the same time, you don't need to tell them. You can just say, this is the most intensely powerful leadership training you're ever going to get. And at the end, pull back the curtain and say, surprise, you're compassionate now. And that's what we do quite literally. And it works every time too. Because people are like, oh, yeah, my employees like me now. I don't know what's going on, but it feels good. They like it. They get that boost. So we want people to taste that and take care of that.
Yeah, well, in fact, Dan, you and I, we worked on a project together and we called it Inspiring Leader, just sort of to get around it, right? But the whole crux of that is to be an inspiring leader. Compassion has a lot to do with it, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the really important thing too, right? Because it's like, I know I have a tendency to look at this stuff from a very psychological science perspective, but you don't need to be a psychologist to be a good human being. You don't need to be a psychologist to take better care of yourself so you can take better care of other people, because that's exactly what the world needs right now. So we aim to give it to people no matter what we call it, right?
Indeed. So Dan, well, since you talked a little bit about Brightsity and the courses, what other courses are available apart from the Compassionate Leadership Program?
Just about anything having to do with work and compassion. So we have a new developing compassionate teams course that we've just deployed, which statistically significantly increases people's courage, their teamwork capacity, their organizational citizenship, diminishes their stress, anxiety, and depression. We've been running actually quite successfully an ethics, business and professional ethics course, which is really interesting because, sorry, I'm going to say this, that sounds like such a boring class, but we make it behavioral so people can see the actual immediate impact of their behaviors in the environment around them. Let's think. We just have a growing number of courses, and I'll encourage you to check out anything you'd like to see on our website, which is just www.brightsity with an S, like university, brightsity.com. and we have a good number of courses out there. And universities use them, businesses use them. It's a lot more efficient in many ways than traditional training, but very complementary. And lots of healthcare organizations actually use our courses because these people are suffering right now desperately, and they need to be taken care of. So we do our best to do that.
Right. Okay, are there any other questions from our attendees? Well, lots of people joined us. Thank you everybody for joining. Yeah, sometimes people come in a little bit late they get caught up with life and everything else. Yeah, but thanks everyone for joining. It's really nice to see such a large turnout. Are there any other questions from the group?
Natasha, this is Sharon. Is it possible that I just steal a little bit of time to share what I mentioned in the chat about walk the talk, walk the walk? Okay, on this topic of compassion, I came from the healthcare industry, so compassion is expected, right, from healthcare industry. And I used to be in HR, and I suspect a lot of the participants today are from HR background. So the walk the talk, I think everybody knows. Walk the walk, and I said literally, it means you really need to be seen and heard on the ground. That's very, very important in my opinion. Someone senior when I was junior then ever told me, do not be a Shenton Way HR. For the audience that are not from Singapore, Shenton Way is the place where your central business district is. And that was very resounding to me because it was told to me by a retiring HR leader, and it was in a shipyard environment. So I came from PricewaterhouseCoopers. A lot of you may have known it is one of the big 4 audit company. And yes, that was located in Shenton Way. And so his comment when we were both in the shipyard environment is, do not be a Shenton Way HR. So walk the walk, i.e. wear your PPE, your personal protection equipment, go up the gangway, go up to the vessel to see how your people are doing. And so I think that was a very, very important statement he said before his retirement. So I thought that was brilliant. And somebody trying to speak as well, sorry. So let me just quickly continue. So in the healthcare industry, the same thing. So as a HR leader there, I would make it a point to be walking in the wards, looking at the patient. Not that I'm a doctor or a nurse. I think it's important to just have a sense of what's going on, how your nurses coping, how your doctors are coping, right in the heart of the ward. So I think it's important. So it's my every Friday lunchtime walkabout. So HR should not be in an ivory tower. You just sit in your room, and it's very important to just get a ground sensing. And thank you very much, people, for doing this series, and thank you, Daniel, for the session today. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. And if I could chime in for just 2 seconds too about what Sharon was saying, in large healthcare organizations, there's a lot of pressure to have doctors see patients very rapidly, because then you can fit in more clients, and that way, you get paid more, right? But what the research has been really clear about is that patients who have doctors that are perceived as being empathetic actually spend less time with their clients, with their doctor. And the reason why is because much of the time that's spent working with the doctor is the patient trying to be heard and trying to be seen and trying to understand, do you care about me? Because, it's easy just to get a diagnosis, right? I cut my finger hurts, and they stitch me up and I'm fine. But if the doctor, spends time with me or just says, hey, I care about you, I'm worried about your pain level, I'm going to be in and out much faster because I won't be asking for that kind of attention. So it's this really interesting kind of oxymoronic way of seeing things, but it really does work. So thanks, Sharon, for that great information, the great comment.
Totally agree, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Well, we are starting to come to the top of the hour, so we will start to wrap up. Thank you, Dan, so much for spending time with us, especially since it's pretty late on your end. It's almost close to midnight.
That's cool. Don't worry about it. I'm just gonna play video games after this anyways. Just kidding.
Yes, and yeah, so do check out brightsity.com. Lots of interesting stuff. You know, we've used the program ourselves, and I went through it myself, and it was really interesting. I must say, I wasn't quite expecting, you know, that sort of reaction and bond that I had with my dyadic partner. Because what we do is we are paired up with a dyadic partner, and then we go through 8 different sessions. And in the course of those 8 sessions, we read information and we unpack it with each other. So by the last session, that bond that I had with my partner, who I didn't know at all, Dan just kind of match made her with me. She's an American who's living in the Netherlands, I think. Yes.
A medical doctor.
Yeah, that's right, medical doctor, and we're still friends. You know,
Oh, awesome.
we say hi to each other, and we've been meaning to catch up over coffee, a virtual coffee, but we've not managed to. Yeah. And yeah, there was a lot of learning. So really appreciate that. And it's a very interesting course.
Thank you.
So yeah, maybe let's have the slides back if we could.
Yeah, sure.
No, what I mean was, and then it might be that some people might ask for the slides. Would you be willing to share them?
Absolutely, absolutely, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So whoever is keen, do let us know. And what I meant by having the slides back was like Melbourne. There we go. Yeah. So please, we'd love to hear from you. Do give us some feedback. So if you could scan on the QR code or click the link in the chat box to give us some feedback. I mean, the link's going to be sent very shortly into the chat box. And maybe if you could tell us what kind of sessions and topics you would like to hear from other experts about, do give us a ping as well so that we know to get the right experts in front of you. Thank you very much, everyone. Could someone send the link for the survey into the chat group? Thank you. Thanks for your feedback, everybody. And Dan, thank you so much for your time.